I spoke with police here, and they said that he legally has the right to record anything he wants. However, I am sure I have some right to privacy. When the police visited my neighbor regarding the camera, my neighbor did move the camera ever so slightly toward the street. Now, a month later, the camera is directly pointing into my bedroom window again. My home is about 50 feet away from his. It is clear that this is where it is recording. He has also threatened me when I have asked personally to move the camera, and he replied with my house, my rules, as well as a mention of a recording of me calling him the N-word. I didn't on said camera. I just want it pointed away from my bedroom window. I'm sure he can hear what goes on in the bedroom as well. What are my options? Am I allowed to put up a board on my property, blocking the camera view from my window? Honestly, that's about all I have left in the tank. Update 1. So a ton has happened since I last posted. I had mentioned in the comments that my neighbor had been basically using sound terrorism to harass us. I began writing in a log of each event that occurred, with the time, the date, the description, if I called the police I did for almost every one, and it began to show an alarming pattern. He was playing sounds at random times of the night every single night. After each major event of sounds, I would drop off a written statement to my local police station for the code enforcement officer. The city was now looking at charging him for noise violations based on my complaints. I took my 3-page log and copies of 7 signed statements and finally had enough of the police taking their time to work on the case against my neighbor. I dropped $95 on paperwork to begin an anti-harassment order against my neighbor. I made sure to explicitly mention the camera pointed in my bedroom window and the ongoing noises. He was served the temporary order that very day by the local police, and sure enough, the noises ramped up. Before our court date to discuss the anti-harassment order, we were subpoenaed to be witnesses for the noise violation. We also brought the former owner of the home as well as the person who lived on the other side of my neighbor as witnesses to his noise-making capabilities. My neighbor never showed to the court date, and at that point had $1,250 pending in tickets. His lawyer showed up an hour late, and the judge graciously accepted his plea to move the date a month forward. Disappointment. Then the date for the anti-harassment order came. Once again, my neighbor didn't show, and his lawyer begged for more time to look over the case. The judge was just and said that everyone has a right to defend their First Amendment rights, so he moved the court date for a month later as well. Disappointment number 2. The noises are continuing on the regular at this point, and we are trying to record them as best as we can on our phones. It was really hard to do because the noises were short and happened at random in the middle of the night. The date for the second anti-harassment arrived, and finally, we saw our neighbor come through the courtroom and sit in the back. When it was our turn to explain the situation, we made sure to present our call log, our statements and videos that we had as evidence against our neighbor. Our neighbor's lawyer tried to get us to give up the call log because he mentioned he was not aware of it before our court date. The judge basically told the lawyer to go fuck himself. The lawyer's only defense for my neighbor was that he worked long hours and couldn't possibly be awake in the middle of the night to terrorize us, and that conversely, we were the ones making the noises. We then brought up the fact that our neighbor had a security camera pointed directly at our home, and he should have plenty of evidence to prove we were indeed the noisemakers. The judge very confidently approved our anti-harassment order, stating no more noises, no more cameras in our windows or at us in general, and our neighbor is not allowed within 25 feet of us. He immediately moved the camera pointing in our bedroom window to being completely flush with the side of the house. Awesome. This was great news. We finally achieved some peace. And then the date for the noise violation trial came, just as lawyer showed up and made a deal with the city lawyer that one ticket would be paid in exchange for no appeal to our anti-harassment order and to throw out 2 tickets. It sucked, but they took the deal. Whatever. And all seemed well. Then, about a month after the anti-harassment order kicked in, the noises began, again, and the camera began to slowly point into our garage, back in the direction toward the bedroom window. This time, the police noticed something more alarming. A red light was going off in the tinted window directly below the camera on the outside of my neighbor's house. They shone their flashlight and spotted a lens. My neighbor had a camera inside his window pointed at my bedroom window the entire time the order was in place, and long before that. The officers told us to stay quiet. Don't be alarmed, but they now were actively seeking a search warrant for the property to seize any noise-making equipment and to take down the cameras as he had broken the order. The next weekend, my neighbor was arrested and we got to sit outside on the front porch while they disassembled the cameras and seized speaker after speaker, megaphones, etc. from my neighbor's home. They said he had 4 foot of insulation surrounding the room with the camera, and the front door of the home was completely barred shut. Unfortunately, they just seized the equipment and will eventually give it back. My neighbor was out of jail the next day, and since they didn't have a search warrant for his hard drives, they couldn't place any voyeurism charges, despite my insistence. They even mentioned they saw me and my husband on a laptop of his. I'm just happy that the noises have stopped, and as far as I know, no more hidden cameras. I'm just glad I could update this crazy situation for you guys. I'm sure I'm not out of the woods yet. Update T. It's close to a year now that we've dealt with the worst of my neighbor. Almost a year ago, we achieved the success of having an anti-harassment order granted. That summer, he was arrested for harassing us, and he stopped with the cameras and the noises. But something was brewing behind those closed doors. Around early November 2017, we had a knock on the door one evening. It was an officer asking if we had heard gunshots in the area. We had not. Soon into our conversation, he mentioned it was our neighbor who called and complained. They were aware of the situation and assured us that despite the situation, they have to respond to all gunshot calls. I was honestly not surprised that after all the quiet, something started up again. The next day, a police cruiser parked across the street from our home. I was expecting someone to knock again and ask about gunshots. No one came to the door, and the officer sat across the street watching my home for over an hour. The next day, I emailed an officer I had been working with previously regarding the situation. The officer told me that my neighbor had been calling 911 every single day on my address for gunshots. By the time I got an email back, it had been a week. Every single day. This man was coming home from work, eating dinner, tending to daily life, and calling 911 on us for shooting guns. The officer said he would look into seeing if this counted as harassment through a third party. The new year came and went, and in early January, I emailed the officer back, and his response was simply that the city prosecutor wanted to set up a phone conference to discuss the plan going forward. The city prosecutor mentioned to me that at that point in time, my neighbor had still been calling 900 every day, even the morning of the conference call. She said they contacted all of my other neighbors to see if they heard any gunshots, and asked if they would testify that they have not heard anything come from our property. They also planned to charge my neighbor with some counts of harassment and wrongfully utilizing emergency services. Part of his deal with the arrest over the summer involved him able to avoid jail time by having good behavior, and they are looking for their time back essentially. His arraignment date came, and his pretrial was set. Came and went. It's being continued until next month. I am worried that he will try to continue this case until the end of time. Our anti-harassment order expires soon, and we will have to drag him to court once again to renew it and spend more money. Things are starting to feel pretty dim again, and honestly, the recent continuance knocked the wind out of my sails. All I can do until I am called as a witness victim is wait. Update 3. Remember how I said that the city prosecutor was all on board to help me finish this? Well, things have changed. The second pretrial after the case was continued is coming up. I contacted the prosecutor to ask why the case was continued. Apparently, the prosecutor went on an extended leave of absence and gave the case to another prosecutor. Okay, no big deal. I was given the contact of the new prosecutor and emailed them to check for an update. No response. 2 weeks have gone by, and 2 emails were sent with no response from the prosecutor. I even contacted the prosecutor's assistant, and no one has gotten back to me. Dead silence. To say that I am disappointed is an understatement. I don't know what to do, because the original prosecutor was so gung-ho about finishing this case, and now I can't get a hold of anyone. This is so uncommon, because when I had questions before, usually I would get a phone call with an answer, and at least an email response. My neighbor keeps adding trash cans to the fence line. These are large, heavy-duty cans with lids. I really don't know what it's about, but it's making me extremely uneasy. This whole situation is seriously giving me anxiety, and I just want it to be over. Radio silence from the only people who are trying to help me is making things so much worse. What should I do? Update 4. so it's all over. The prosecutor called me and said, of course, they aren't wanting to plead guilty to all the charges, and instead of jail time, his attorney wants 30 days of house arrest, which is what he does already, just sits in his house and never leaves. The trial was pushed to July, and we are moving out of state around that time. I told the prosecutor that we wouldn't be here to be witnesses. I have no soul left or fight in me. Thanks for all your help, everyone. The justice system has failed us. Update 5. Hello all. Thanks for listening and following this ridiculous thread of events. My neighbor pled guilty to 19 counts using emergency services inappropriately, and one other charge they won't explain. He cannot talk to me or my husband, and cannot bother anyone on this property, ever. He is also required to have a mental health evaluation, which he was supposed to go do on his own when this started rolling. The result of breaking any of these rules will hopefully be jail time. Now is the new dilemma. He was outside today, looking at our brand new for sale sign on the house. Not kidding, and maybe this is just paranoia, but my realtor called and said someone had scheduled an appointment to view the home this evening at 6 p.m. We haven't told him about the situation, because honestly we thought nothing was going to come out of this, and we had lost. Now the new people that will be moving in when we sell are protected, but we figured to let sleeping dogs lie, and let our neighbor be the first one to mess things up. We were put in the same situation with the last owner of the home, and it isn't illegal in WA to not disclose these things. I think my neighbor is trying to tour my home. I have no problem with him wanting to buy the home, but I am not interested in him snooping. I know my realtor will be monitoring him, but a part of me is wondering if he will be trying to take photos of my stuff, etc. I have partially lost my mind even considering that man will be in our home. What can I do? My husband was thinking about parking down the street when the appointment time was, and making sure, I suggested a nanny cam, both of which are probably insane to do. I am afraid that telling my realtor will also result in a nightmare. It wasn't my neighbor that toured the home, thank God. But now we have a Nest camera set up, so we will know. Update 6. So my neighbor decided to throw up some nice floodlights pointed over his fence right at our bedroom window, right after his court date. In that time, we have sold the home and moved to an apartment and transitioned to our new destination, far, far away. He turned on the floodlights every night at 10 p.m., and they would clearly shine through the bedroom window, even with the blackout film, and really shone through our guest bedroom, where my mom stayed for a week to visit. Police came out and took pics and drove by several nights to confirm they were still up. Part of his plea deal is to not commit similar incidences and further harass us. This comes into play later. I called the police, and they ended up serving me papers saying I was required to be a witness in court. Court day came, they were asking for jail time, and my neighbor's attorney asked for a continuance because he didn't have time to review the new info. They granted it. Second week comes around, we rescheduled for a special hearing with a pro-team judge. Mistake. Today was the hearing, and the second time we all had to take off work to show up. The judge immediately told the city prosecutor, since she didn't have a formal briefing, that he was not familiar with the case, and that it would not be heard today. Typically, the judge who does hear the city's cases is well informed, and the prosecutor objected to this, saying it is not a requirement. You knew what was on the docket today. The judge further mentioned that because specific charges were not filed, and they were just asking for jail time, given back onto the jail time they waived at the previous hearing. He wasn't interested in doing this today. He read the plea deal and said that similar incidences is too vague and should be thrown out, and he didn't know how shining lights on our property was similar to whatever he got in trouble for in the first place. Then he mentioned he had court in Seattle in 2 hours and wasn't interested in hearing my testimony today. Also, since we will be gone by October, he didn't see the issue in why we were even there. Since we moved, we can't be harassed anymore, so problem solved. I broke down in tears of sheer frustration. The prosecutor said I don't have to be a witness anymore, and they would talk to the usual judge in the case, and to keep in touch with her. When my neighbor walked out, he did a very dramatic prayer hands in the air, like he knew he won. I give up again. We're leaving. It's over. I will never get my day in court. I will never know what I did to this man to make him harass me so deeply. I will never get 2 years of my life back. I hate it. The only good thing out of this is the police report that we got after they raided his home last summer. Dude's a weirdo sexual deviant, even in the eyes of a very liberal and accepting Washingtonian.